So today's workshop, which I will now start recording. Oh no, Live has already done it. Brilliant. We will be introducing what is project impact and also how we evaluate impact to give you a bit of a kind of kickstart on your impact and evaluation journey. And over the next sort of 50 minutes, what this will look like is a whistle-stop tour around impact, including its definitions, and the same with evaluation. So how do we evaluate projects both in the planning phase, so for those of you as to who are still putting your projects together, and also in the delivery phase of the project. We'll explore proportionate evaluation methods. So a lot of people who are joining today have been funded through the Small Project Research Fund and only have a year sort of time frame to deliver the project. So it's making sure that we can keep your evaluation methods proportionate for a year's delivery time. We're going to use a case study, as I said, from one of the Empower spin-off projects to contextualize some of these methods for your projects, and also hopefully build some confidence in evidencing impact and send you off with a sort of toolkit of ideas of how to do that. So we're going to start off by exploring what is impact and what we mean by project impact. And so the funder that largely has funded the Empower Dementia Network, the Economic and Social Research Council, defines impact as the demonstrable contribution that excellent research makes to society and the economy. So whilst a lot of the projects aren't necessarily kind of scientific research projects, because of our funder is a research funder, this is the sort of definition that we're just going to use to sort of springboard the conversation. But impact can mean many different things across all of our different partners. So I'll try and encapsulate some of that today. And for our funder, this can include both economic and societal impacts. So these are the contributions that excellent social and economic research has on society and the economy. And that's benefits to individuals, organisations, or nations as a whole. And the other type is the academic impact. So the contribution that excellent social and economic research makes in shifting understanding and advancing scientific methods, theory and application across and within disciplines. So a lot of our projects that have been funded or not funded, or a lot of our community partners are working really interdisciplinary, which is brilliant. And hopefully some of the methods that I'm sharing today will show how we can kind of start evidencing across different disciplines as well. So today I'm going to be using a lot of resources from a guy called Mark Reed, who runs a consultancy called Fast Track Impact. And I really like how he explains and works through impact. And I've got a lot of his websites and toolkits and things shared throughout the slides. But I just think he's done a huge amount of work on specifically on research impact, but there are ways that we can contextualize that to many different types of impacts. So I'll be using those today. But he splits things out into 10 different types of impact. So these can be understanding or awareness, impacts on how people understand and are aware of things, capacity and preparedness, attitudes, policy, economic, environmental, health and well-being, cultural, other social, and then other forms of decision-making and behavioural change impacts. Now, on the next few slides, I'm going to go into exactly what these are and also some examples. And I've pulled a couple of examples from some of the projects that were submitted to the Small Project Research Fund as well, to try and contextualise what some of these might mean in reality. So the first one is understanding and awareness impacts. So this is where people understand an issue better than they did before based on your project or intervention. So for example, if you had a project that was about helping people understand how healthy eating can improve brain health, it is an understanding that people understand more about the importance of eating healthily to maintain good brain health. So a lot of projects, I think there will be an element of awareness raising or helping people understand the topic that your project is looking to support people with. The second one is attitudes. So this is a change in an attitude. So typically a group of people who may share similar views towards a new attitude that brings them or others benefit. So for example, and several of the projects I know will pertain to this, but a reduction in stigmatizing views potentially held by a specific group of people. Would be an attitudinal change. Now, attitudinal change on a very large scale and understand, so for example, the general public have a different attitude towards dementia, for example, is something that would be very, very difficult to actually evaluate unless you're working with a big survey kind of company that are working with government data, for example. And that's what a lot of the surveys that the Office of National Statistics do, for example, is looking at attitudinal change. But these can be attitudes can be changed on a much more small and localized scale, and I'll share how to kind of evaluate some of that later. The next one is economic impacts. So this is a monetary benefit arising from the project, either in terms of money saved, costs avoided, or increases in turnover, profit, or funding. Or maybe a benefit to groups of people or the environment that is measured in a monetary term. So, for example, one of the projects that I'm working on is looking at mental health crisis for people with dementia. And an example here would be if there was better support in the community so that people didn't reach a crisis point, they wouldn't need to be admitted to hospital, and therefore less money would be spent in the NHS on supporting hospital admission. So economic impacts can mean a lot of different things. It can also be an individual's being able to access monetary support, maybe carers allowance, or understanding the benefit system a bit better because of your project. And that is a couple of examples of some of the monetary, the economic impacts. So the next one is environmental, which might not necessarily be as applicable to the projects here, but for example, these are benefits from the project to genetic diversity, species or habitat conservation, and ecosystems, including benefits that humans derive from a healthy environment. So the kind of second half of that, about the benefits that humans derive from a healthy environment, is something I know that a couple of the projects might lean into, especially with our meeting centre that's happening in a golf course, for example, but also things like dementia gardening groups, improving local biodiversity, or encouraging people with dementia to access. So it's a farm, for example, in Northumberland, or Dementia Adventure. This might be another one for you. So there are ways that you can link some of the project outputs to the environmental impacts as well. Health and wellbeing impacts. So this will be a huge one for folks in the room right now. And this is about projects that lead to better outcomes for the health of individuals, groups, or public health as a whole. So this is including saving lives and improving people's quality of life, and the quality of life being a huge kind of a key thing for the Empowered Dementia Network, and wider benefits for the wellbeing of individuals and social groups, including both physical and social aspects, which include emotional wellbeing, psychological wellbeing, economic wellbeing, and measures of life satisfaction. And I know that a huge amount of the projects that are kind of working, our community partners are looking at that life satisfaction and reducing inequalities for people with dementia. So, for example, an example here would be a dementia cafe, improving the well-being of attendees, and attendees reporting to feel better after attending the cafe, as an example. So policy impacts, this is the contribution that a project makes to new or amended laws, regulations, or other policy mechanisms that enable them to meet a defined need or objective that delivers public benefit. So you're assessing the extent of which your project made a contribution, because what we're trying to recognise here is that policy change is often a big culmination of many different factors that lead to the change. And it's really important for you to be able to argue for the significance of your specific contribution, and being able to evidence that. So, for example, a local authority might prioritise dementia-friendly outdoor spaces. So if they were doing a regeneration of the local area, dementia and they're putting in more green spaces, for example, have they consulted with people with dementia and family carers to make sure that these outdoor spaces are also dementia friendly? And how did you contribute to that change? So that would be a policy impact. Other forms of decision making and behaviour change is this can be direct or indirect, so through changes in understanding or awareness, but these projects can inform a wide range of individual, group and organisational behaviours. And this is all about how one impact can snowball effect into another one. So, for example, if you were doing a social media campaign about reducing stigma in a specific community, that might mean, therefore, that there are more people accessing primary care and diagnosis and follow-on support. So whilst your kind of immediate impact is a reduction in stigma, greater awareness, it actually could lead to more people receiving care that they need, an improvement in quality of life, for example. And also, if you're more people are accessing primary care diagnosis, then maybe there's less acute care required, hospital admissions, there are less people accessing support at a much later stage, which could lead to an economic impact as well. So this one is all about the kind of snowball effect of different impacts. Sorry, just losing my voice there. So the next one is cultural impacts, which are quite possibly the hardest to evidence and also to enact, because this is about changing people's values, attitudes, beliefs, and the discourse within a community and patterns of behaviour. So whether this is what we call explicit, which is the kind of legal, the rules or law, or implicit, so things that are kind of captured within a community, like rules of thumb, accepted practices, things that happen culturally. And this can be within an organisation, so organisational culture. For the researchers in the room, we know that changing university cultures takes a very long time and often feels very impenetrable. Social groups or within society. And these impacts deliver benefits to the members of these groups and those that they interact with. So an example here is a change in a cultural belief may take a considerable amount of time, especially if there is a huge cultural preconception of dementia being a curse, for example. This is something that we've heard a lot in the project that I'll be using as a case study later, working with South Asian communities. And this, there's lots of different types of cultural impacts, but these are quite considerable to be able to demonstrate. And then the other social impacts. So benefits to social groups of society not covered by other types of impacts. And for some reason, the definition here is wrong. What was typed there earlier before I've accidentally copied and pasted the wrong one, is another social impact here, for example, is if there's a change in a social group or makeup of a group that means that they are now going to be represented within dementia research, for example. So an example here is because of that anti-stigma campaign and your working with a previously underserved community, that they are more likely to become involved in research, for example. And then the final one within kind of Mark Reed's framework is capacity or preparedness. And this is something that we're really hoping that all projects, whether funded or unfunded, will be able to demonstrate, because the idea is that projects lead to a new or enhanced capacity. So whether this is physical, financial, natural, human resources, or social capital and connectivity, that's likely to lead to future benefits. And that's to individuals, groups or organisations, because it will make you more prepared and better able to cope with changes that might otherwise impact negatively on them. So, for example, for a lot of the projects here, we'd really love the exchange between projects and meeting new people and getting involved with these events and the celebration events will mean that there is exchange between projects that may spark collaboration and open up different avenues to find funding, for example, or to work together. And that is building capacity kind of within this group. So as I've kind of went through these, and I was chatting to Empower's network manager. We want to request an addition to this list, and it's something that's really important to the Empower Dementia Network and for all of the projects and partners that we're working with. And this is methodological impacts. So, for example, the projects that curate new methods of co-production across community groups, organisations, people living with dementia and family carers, and projects that improve how we work together and contribute to understanding of what good co-production looks like with diverse communities. So, for example, understanding of how to include a community who were previously underrepresented in dementia research and what working with them would look like and how we do that together. So those are the, I guess, 11 different types of impact. And I know that there is probably a lot of information in there. But I will, as I said, share the slides, and all of this information will be on them for you to digest a bit more slowly a bit later. But when we're thinking about impact, these last sort of 11 slides have shared a very positive sort of slant on impact. But for me, I think it's really, really important to understand that impact isn't always positive and it isn't always intended. But it's really important to understand that we can, as researchers, as community partners, as people with lived experience, we can have negative and unintended impacts on the people that we're working with, but it's all about how we mitigate that risk and how we evaluate to do better next time. So impact, as I said, can be positive and negative, intended or unintended. It's important that you make space to explore all of this during your planning stages and to mitigate risks of causing harm. And this can include things like psychological security for your participants and also your project teams. So as a team, are you prepared to maybe run the activities or to have the conversations that you're going to be having during your projects? But also things like the physical environment of your activities. Are you making sure that they are accessible and inclusive of all people kind of in your groups? But this was just a kind of really important caveat for me to make, and I could do a whole sort of day's workshop on the kind of unintended impact of impact, if that makes sense. And I'm really happy to talk to anyone about this. And the team is here to support you as well in mitigating any risks that you may sort of have felt are like possibility with your projects. So now I'd just like to ask you, what impact will your project have? So this is going to be a little bit of a tiny reflective task just by yourself. I'm not going to ask anyone to shout out or anything. But if I go back to the 10 sort of types of impact, please feel free to just put in the chat which of them kind of speaks to you in your project, and just, yeah, pop in the chat. From when I read through all of the projects, there's going to be a lot of understanding and awareness, I think, and a lot of capacity building, a lot of health and well-being. There's a couple of cultural impacts in there. I think definitely people who are working with the outdoor environment, then environmental impacts for sure. And specifically, I know there's one project that's looking at economic resilience. Brilliant. So Lizzie said cultural, health and well-being, understanding and awareness, and some policy. Brilliant. Ellie said health and well-being, cultural, other social, and understanding and awareness. Absolutely. Loose, most likely, capacity and preparedness. Brilliant. Some policy. Lots of health and well-being. Brilliant. Yeah. Dementia Adventures project sits across health and well-being and environment. Yeah, lots of health and well-being, and great to see lots of cultural. Brilliant. Brilliant. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. So it's really nice to see that there's a huge diversity of impacts that could come out as part of these projects. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Brilliant. So once we've had a think about our the impacts that we're likely to have, we need to start framing that in terms of a sort of a roadmap to change. There's lots of really boring academic language around roadmaps to change, things of theory of change and all of this, but roadmap to change was something that one of our community advisory groups on one of our projects really liked the terminology, instead of sort of a theory of change or something a bit more academic. But a roadmap sort of lays out what you'd like to do and how you'd like to do it, essentially. And there's two kind of key questions to ask yourself when you're thinking about what are the impacts that you'd like to make and how you'd like to do them. And I tend to ask myself at the beginning of a project, what change do we want to make by undertaking our project? So between now and whenever your kind of projects you'd like that to happen, what is the change that you'd like to see? And I really like asking this to kind of like within a whole project team, and understanding that everyone's might be a little bit different. And that's okay. I think the importance of working how we're working in co-production with really diverse groups is that this will look different to everyone. And as long as everyone has an overarching change that they'd like to see, how that change and what that change looks like might be a little bit different. And that's absolutely okay. And once you know what the change is that you'd like to make, you can begin to figure out how to achieve that change. So if anyone's feeling like they'd like to pop in the chat, I'd really love to know what change you're looking to make by undertaking your project. This can just be a very short sentence or even a few words. Yeah. Digital confidence in searching for online meaningful activity which is culturally appropriate, bringing joy and social connection to the everyday, increasing well-being and support. Brilliant. Making taking part in research more accessible and enjoyable for people living with dementia and their supporters. To show that meeting centres can be a viable and successful model for dementia support in Northern Ireland for carers and people living with dementia, and increasing dementia provision and resources in majority communities. Brilliant. Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. So these are the kind of big overarching changes that you're looking to make. And I imagine for any kind of funding applications you're putting in, this is your sort of mission statement and aim of your whole project. So then it's really important to think about how will we achieve this change? And I know that within a funding application or when you're planning out what you're going to do, this is the sort of the nuts and bolts. So what are we going to do and when are we going to do it? Well, what is great about kind of having those steps is that it lays out your roadmap, which is the steps that you will need to take to achieve that that goal and the change that you'd like to make. I'm going to just quickly show a planning template, which is a really great way of once you know what you want to do and what potential impacts you might have. This is a really great template to start thinking about what you'd have to do, what would change, what would success look like, and then the risks and risk mitigation. I'm not going to stay on this slide because I don't want to completely overload you all with information. But this is available by the link at the bottom there, which I will share afterwards, and is a great way to start thinking about kind of mapping out your potential impacts. But what I'd love to do instead of kind of focusing on some of the toolkits that I'll be sharing is contextualizing some of what I'm saying to a project case study. So Empower has a kind of spin-out project that came directly from community partners when we were starting to think about what the mission statement for Empower would be. And we curated a bunch of resources and community activities, but what we were seeing is that these weren't necessarily culturally appropriate for people from diverse South Asian communities. So we wrote a funding application for the One King's Impact Fund, and kind of from that, Bridging Gaps in Dementia Care, co-producing culturally appropriate solutions with South Asian communities was born. And I guess the aim of our project, so what we wanted to change was we wanted to build trust and co-create culturally appropriate resources that meaningfully engage South Asian communities in shaping dementia care research and services. And the overarching change is that we wanted to see greater representation from South Asian communities in the work of the Empowered Dementia Network, but also culturally appropriate interventions for people in community. So we had said, so our sort of how are we going to do this was guided by co-production. We will build trust with South Asian community groups across London and the West Midlands, specifically working with a group in Croydon and one in Wolverhampton. We will establish a community advisory board to identify community peer researchers to provide ongoing guidance and act as bridges between the project team and the community groups. Co-produce culturally appropriate engagement resources by tailoring and refining existing network materials. Training community peer researchers to deliver these resources in understanding priorities for inclusive dementia care from the perspectives of South Asian communities. And pilot and refine the resources through co-creation workshops to develop a shared vision for excellent and inclusive dementia care. So the change we wanted to see was essentially, are we seeing an increase in the representation of South Asian communities in the broader work of Empower? So what we did in terms of the community advisory group, which was essentially the project team. So our community advisory group was made up of researchers, community partners, people with lived experience and students. And we brought people physically together, which is something that many of your teams have already done during the co-production phase of your funding applications. And we looked to understand together what is the change that we wanted to achieve from everyone's different perspectives. So this was done in person and everyone had the opportunity to kind of say what they wanted to achieve. And this was done physically in Croydon, so within one of our community partners' spaces. And we thought about how we were going to do it as well. And this created a list of priorities, which was our roadmap to change. So our roadmap looked something like this. So they were the changes we wanted to achieve, which were building trust in South Asian community organisations, less confusion and fear about dementia within the community, building a model for inclusive co-production with diverse intergenerational South Asian groups, understanding the diversity of South Asian groups, including understanding differences and similarities in South Asian groups, for example, migration routes, influence on language and religion. Dementia being understood in the community as a terminal progressive neurological condition, addressing and countering stigma, and creating a foundation for future research built on co-production and driven by what is most important to the communities we were working with. And finally, understanding, therefore, the best ways to engage in inclusive co-production with South Asian community groups. So after we kind of agreed that list, we then had a prioritization workshop where each of those bullet points was turned into a card and people kind of went into groups and put these cards into a priority list from high to low priority. But what came out of this workshop was that we wanted to do all of it and nothing was a kind of higher priority over another, but actually that it was a series of steps that we had to follow from growing the understanding all the way through developing a co-production pathway for how we would do that together. And that was only came out of kind of us sitting down physically with those cards and trying to prioritize them and thinking, actually, we can't prioritize this because we need to do all of it to be able to actually deliver the change that we want to see in the community, which was improving care for people from South Asian communities in Croydon and Wolverhampton. So what was also really important here is that whilst the roadmap looked the same for everyone and it kind of became a, as I said, that sort of timeline for what we were going to have to do, was that the two communities we were working with were very different and had done a lot of different engagement in their localities. So we then did our third community advisory group, where we kind of contextualized this roadmap into the two different locations. So we had one in Croydon and one in Wolverhampton. So in Croydon, they have a really amazing intergenerational cafe and intergenerational approach, but hadn't reached a lot of South Asian elders and people who weren't as likely to come to a community event. So there was a focus on recruitment in other spaces for this workshop. And then in Wolverhampton, they realised a gap in engaging South Asian men. So again, a kind of difference in recruitment and who we were going to be working with. So that was the kind of importance of contextualising. So that kind of leads us up into how we were figuring out sort of what our impacts were going to be and how we were going to deliver them, and sort of showed you a bit of a case study of like how we actually did that. But the key question for us then was, how do we know we're achieving this change? And that is where evaluation comes in. So I'm just going to quickly pause there and just give everyone a breath. Are there any questions at this point about sort of impact that you would like me to address now, before I go on to how we prove that we are having or not having impact? I'm happy to take some questions now if helpful. Great. As I said, feel free to pop them in the chat as we go. That's absolutely fine. So again, I'll start with a bit of a definition of evaluation, then I'll share a lot of different evaluation methods, and then kind of contextualize that by sharing what we did within the building the Bridges project. So evaluation, very, very broadly, is a structured way of understanding the value, quality, and impact of your project by gathering evidence. And this evidence can be about what you actually did, who was involved in that, what changed for them, how you know that that changed, and what you learnt specifically, and what you would do differently next time. So I believe that evaluation is kind of not any good unless you're having learnings about what you would do differently next time and making sure that that is implemented. And that's kind of why we've structured the sort of evaluation support for any projects that have been funded around your sort of 6 monthly check-in, and then the kind of post-final evaluation is making sure that there is that continued improvement in what you're doing, and shared learnings across the network as well. And why we want to have the sort of regular check-ins with different projects, to kind of understand if there's anything that you've taken away or that you've learned that other projects would really learn from. And that's not just the projects that have been funded, but everyone. And one thing that, as I said at the beginning, that is really important is proportionate evaluation. So proportionate evaluation means collecting just enough meaningful evidence to understand what changed, for whom, and why it matters. Because what we really don't want to do is create an unnecessary burden for your participants, but also for the project teams, because we understand that if you have been funded, you've sort of got a year to deliver your project, and if you haven't, you may be just evaluating a small intervention that you're looking to then quickly write into a funding application or something else. So we need to make sure that we're able to capture information, but without making it really burdensome for the project teams or your participants. And as I said, small projects don't need heavy resource intensive evaluation. We need to focus on useful, light touch, meaningful evidence, and I'll share how we're going to do this after this, and then prioritize what helps you understand what changed and why it matters. So in the next few slides, I'm going to share some evaluation methods that I think would be really good and also useful for the projects kind of that are on the call. But this is not an exhaustive list. I've also shared some resources and papers full of creative evaluation methods that you can take a look at. And I know that we have people on the call who also have done some really amazing work on creative evaluation as well. So I encourage everyone to kind of talk to one another, and I'll share those when I can. So evaluation methods. So once you know what you want to do, you can plan an appropriate method of evaluation. So why use different evaluation methods and why it's important to use multiple different ones is that different people express themselves in different ways. Dementia inclusive projects need flexible and accessible approaches. So a lot of academic research, when we talk about evaluation, we think of surveys, interviews, things, quite intensive ways of finding out information. But all the projects that kind of are here today, we need to think flexibly and accessibly about our approaches, and that no one single method captures a full picture of change, which is really, really key as well. And combining methods strengthens your evidence and your story. And what I would always really push as well, as a kind of with my communications professional hat on, is that the more visual you can be about your evaluation methods, the more stuff that you have for dissemination and telling the story of why your project was really impactful as well. And that helps a lot with future funding applications or pitching for future projects. So I'm just going to share a few methods that I think are really, really great, and a few templates as well. So if you want to get going with this sort of thing, it should be really easy following this workshop. So the first evaluation method is impact log. And basically what this means is just capturing everything that happens as it happens. So whether this is in a diary, a spreadsheet, a shared document, this is where you can keep track of things as it happens rather than trying to remember everything at the end. So this can be activities that you actually did, interactions that you've had with people, feedback, where if it's informal, so for example, not through a survey, but if someone just throws kind of an offhand comment about something, you can write it down. Decisions that have been made in the team and why they've been made. Maybe some unexpected outcomes. It's really important to expect the unexpected, and any early signs of change. And yeah, this can be date specific as dates or of activities and interactions, who was involved, what happened, quotes or observations, making sure that unless you have gone through ethical, if you've got a data protection impact assessment, that you keep everything anonymous if you're quoting people, and any unexpected outcomes, positive or negative. And as I said, early signs of change or impact. And follow-up decisions, actions and decisions. So what happened as a result of the thing that you're recording. So a template could look as simple as this. If you wanted to use a spreadsheet or a document, it can be super simple, and then you just add in the date and what happened. And if you get used to kind of using this and updating this as things happen, it means that you've got a really great body of evidence when you need to start writing your sort of interim, when you have your interim meetings or also your report at the end. Another one is reflective diaries, and anyone who was at the Empower launch workshop in 2024 would have been given a reflective diary, and this is one that someone in the group decorated. So this is a safe space for you in terms of a personal confidential space for you or your participants to write down anything. So anyone that came to the workshop that I ran, this notebook was given to people as a place for you to write your private reflections. You could share them if you wanted to, but they were sort of protected spaces for anything that you'd reflected on through the session. And I keep one of these for each of my individual projects, and it helps me just kind of continually reflect about a specific project, and also acts as some great evaluation at the end. One project I worked on, one of the researchers wrote in there that the workshop that they reminded them of why they did research, and things like that are super important to be able to evidence and remind people maybe when they're finding things a bit more difficult. But you can add a description of the experience, maybe your feelings and thoughts about the experience. Evaluation, so delve a bit deeper into both the good and the bad of that experience. Analysis, to make sense of the situation if you're a more analytical person. A conclusion about what you learned and what you could have done differently. and then an action plan for how you would deal with a similar situation in the future, or general changes that you might find appropriate. Now, I know colleagues that work in the third sector, this is the sort of reflective practice that can sometimes be supported when you're in supervision, maybe after a difficult interaction with a service user. For example, the charity that I work with use reflective diaries in that process, but I just find them a really nice way to keep track of what I'm thinking on different projects and reminding myself, specifically if we're running several series of workshops, maybe what happened in the last workshop that I forgot before entering into the next one. But a good model is Gibbs reflective cycle. This is one of the most common models of reflection and how to kind of do reflective practice. And again, that link is clickable, and it's at the end of the presentation as well. The University of Edinburgh have done a really great page on this. Another one is surveys. They're quick and mainly can be accessible if done right, accessible ways of gathering feedback. They're useful for capturing changes and understanding confidence or experience. And I'll often do a quick survey with a research team or a community, any sort of kind of team that have been brought together at the beginning, middle, and end of a project with the same questions, so that you can map a change across a project. And it's, as I said, so that makes it easy to analyze and compare over time. And it also works well alongside kind of the qualitative methods of sort of what happened and when, and the quotes that you collect. Good surveys include think like 5 to 8 questions maximum. Keeping them short and focused is really, really key. I think I can share the surveys that we put together for the One King's Impact Fund project that I shared earlier, that was sort of made for dementia awareness activities and workshops with people with dementia and family carers, if that's helpful to anyone as a sort of a template for ones to create for your own activities. Clear and simple language. A mix of scaled questions, so thinking about confidence and understanding, and also open questions. So what changed for you, or is there anything else you'd like to tell us? And then space for participants to share anything unexpected. Often leaving a kind of open question at the end does leave a lovely space for people to share anything that you haven't captured, and that's often really good. And one of my favourite questions to ask is, in one word, how would you describe your experience today? And this is one that I use pretty much in whether I'm doing an event like this or whether working kind of with community groups or people with lived experience. Often people will write whole paragraphs. I'm happy for anyone to interpret in one word, but this often gives a really lovely snapshot of the general feeling that you can capture within a space. And this was a word cloud that we created after a dementia awareness event in Wolverhampton. That people shared their one word, and we've put it into a word cloud. So it's often, again, a really good way to create visual prompts. Creative or arts-based methods, so approaches that use art, movement, sound, or imagery to help participants express experiences, emotions, changes in ways that may be more accessible, enjoyable, or meaningful. So this can include people who may have who may find verbal or written feedback difficult, capture emotional, sensory, or relational dimensions of change, support expression beyond words, and create a relaxed and engaging evaluation environment. So it doesn't feel like you're being watched, or you're in an interview or you're writing a survey. It's a bit more relaxed. So examples of this is an art exhibition that had extra bits of wood screwed onto the exhibition where people could write their feedback to a specific piece of art that was created about mental health in the local environment. This is where people used ink on their fingers to feed back on cards about how they felt about them. And this was someone expressing that they really didn't like the idea of being touched, but they didn't say that. It was done by putting ink on fingers and then leaving a mark on a card. And then this is collage, where one of our participants made a collage piece that said "not alone," and that is probably one of the most powerful pieces of evaluation I have in kind of saved on my laptop, of how someone was feeling in a creative workshop. And examples can be, for example, painting or drawing. So participants expressing feelings or experiences visually. Photography, so take a photo of something that represents how you felt today. I know Ellie probably has a lot of ideas about how to use photography for evaluation with the Photobook project. Poetry or short phrases. So I know we've got Ronald on the call as well. So poetry is a way of sharing personal reflections or how you've experienced something. And I really like it when a group of people co-create a poem from a single word, maybe empower, and you write an acrostic poem and how that's kind of felt for you that day. Dance or movement, so noticing changes in confidence, engagement, or connection. Or musical sound, so using rhythm or soundscapes to reflect a mood or an energy in the room. So those are some creative arts-based methods. Then you've got the kind of more structured ones, so semi-structured interviews. So this is a conversational way of gathering rich insights. So using a set of guiding questions, but allowing participants to shape the direction of the conversation. So it isn't a question and sort of rigid answer and then on to the next question. It's just letting a conversation happen. And you can ask open questions. So tell me about something. So tell me about how today made you feel. Tell me about, how if you enjoyed this. Focusing on things about change, confidence, connection, or challenges. So again, what can we learn from this to implement next time? And reflections on what was helpful and meaningful and suggestions for improvement. And to keep this proportionate to the sort of time scales, is interviews should be short, so 15 to 30 minutes maximum, using accessible language, and offer different options. So whether that's in person, on the phone, video, or supported conversation, and record the notes or audio with consent. So taking an audio and getting a transcript is really useful, but if for any reason the person would request you not to record audio, then getting really good at writing notes or having someone with you who is good at it would be great. And it's the same similar sort of activity, but for debriefs. And this is something we've used quite a lot within the One King's Impact Fund project, is short structured group conversations held after an activity or session to reflect on what's happened, what was learned, and what changes are emerging. So this might be specifically for your teams, so the teams that are delivering your projects, coming together and having a conversation after an activity, or maybe at the 6-month point of the project when you're kind of thinking about your evaluation check-ins. You should discuss what went well, what challenges you noticed, what surprised you, what changed for participants, and maybe what you could adapt for next time. I also like adding in the use one word to describe today. That's often quite nice to get from the project team as well. And then again, keeping it proportionate. So 10 to 15 minutes, use the same prompts each time so that you can measure change, capture notes in your impact log, and make space for all voices, including volunteers and partners. So if there's anyone that's joined the team for the day, including them in the debrief as well is really important. But as I said, this is not, that's kind of the main ones that I sort of like the project teams I'm working with are using, but other methods exist. And this is a whole paper full of evaluation methods, such as rapid feedback. So writing one word or a phrase on a post-it note and leaving it on the wall before you walk out the door. But it can also be made more accessible by having a series of cards that people just read or look at an emotion and pick up maybe before they leave to express how they're feeling. Feedback walls, as I said, kind of some prompts written on the wall, and then people can just stick a post-it note on. Partner reflections, if people are coming in small groups or partners, encouraging them to reflect with one another and maybe having a floating facilitator to capture some of that. And also exit tokens. So a codified token, for example, if you have different coloured tokens depending on how people felt, and then they can leave them in a pot on the way out, or something like that. So I'm just going to pause for 1 second. I'm just going to go through this. Right. So what this can look like, for example, with the One King's Impact Fund project, is we did surveys. for our participants in each of the projects, but also for our community advisory board. So at the 6-month mark of our project, we had a set of questions. So what I said before about our roadmap to change, we wanted to increase understanding of dementia within the community advisory board. We wanted to improve connection between people, and then in terms of in the community, we wanted to improve understanding of dementia, reduce stigma, and then longer term we wanted to build a method of co-production, ensuring that South Asian communities can be engaged. So, for example, this is like results from some of the one of the surveys of rating of understanding of dementia before and after one of our sessions, and it's really kind of easy to give sort of people tick boxes on a survey to do this. And then this was another one, so about the specific activity. So to make sure that after this activity, we could take the learnings and put it into the next activity, which was great. And as I said, those one words, so the one word to describe the activity can be put into a word cloud like this, which is great and can be used for communicating the impact of your project. And as well, we had sort of different scales. So things like if we're looking at, this was for the community advisory board, about our understanding of the diversity of South Asian groups has increased, and then you can do the sort of slightly disagree to strongly agree. I wouldn't recommend using this scale if you're doing it with your audiences or participants of a project. It's a bit more kind of complex and not as accessible, but for our community advisory board, this was really great to understand the changes in people's understanding of something across the project. I will go past that, you don't need that. So as we're getting to 5 minutes too, I'm just going to share some top tips and then make sure that there's time for questions. But my key top tips in terms of evaluation are: capture everything as you go. Nothing that anyone says or nothing that kind of comes through is small or insignificant. And make sure that it's jotted down somewhere. And if as a team you had sort of a kind of common place where you can share things, that's even better, because it can generate conversation about what's happening. Don't underestimate the number of facilitators or volunteers that you need to capture evidence. So, for example, if you're running an activity and you've got a couple of facilitators who are keeping the activity going, having an extra couple of people who are just sat there listening to what is happening and writing down anything is really, really key. So, for example, within the project I've been speaking about, you'd always have one facilitator at a table who's running the activity, and then one person who's note-taking and listening to the conversation. And some of the greatest evaluation has come out of just some of the quotes that some of our note takers have written down. Make sure that your methods are culturally appropriate. For example, we had people on hand to speak to people in their first language, to fill out the questionnaires and evaluation forms as well, and that was really important. And we've captured some great impact from being able to do that. And leaving space for the unknown. Try not to plan everything down to the sort of nth degree. Leave space for kind of conversations. Have, an extra hour on top of your workshop just to have lunch with each other, and build space for those sort of more organic conversations to happen and really understand how people are thinking and feeling. And catching people before they leave, I think, is really key, and not in a sort of difficult way, is not with a really extensive interview or something, but just a way that people can share with you, even if it is just, please share one word with us to describe your day. That would be really important. So yes, thanks everyone. That has been an incredibly quick whistle-stop tour around impact and evaluation.